Everyone thought the neighborhood was perfect, but I knew better. Because the moment I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd bought, I felt eyes on me. Cold, judging eyes. She was standing there, arms crossed. That tight smile that wasn't a smile at all. The woman everyone in town called Karen. "Excuse me," she said before I could even grab my suitcase from the car. "We need to talk about your HOA fees." HOA fees. That was the very first thing she said to me. Not a hello, not a welcome, just rules, regulations, and money. The funny thing was, I wasn't even in her HOA. I tried to explain, calmly, politely. "Ma'am, this house isn't part of the HOA, it was built on the exempted land parcel." Her eyes narrowed as if I had insulted her personally. "That's impossible. Every house here falls under the HOA. You'll need to pay up or I'll be forced to fine you." Fine me on my own property? The words stung, but I held my tongue. After all, I wasn't just the new neighbor. I wasn't just another target for her power trips. I was something she had no idea about. I was her landlord. But telling her right then would have been too easy, too clean, and sometimes the sweetest justice comes from silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I carried my bags inside, her voice still ringing in my ears. She kept talking, listing all the violations she claimed I was committing. My grass length, my trash cans, even the color of my curtains. I hadn't been there a full hour, and already I was drowning in accusations. That night, as I sat in the empty living room, I wondered what kind of person wakes up every morning determined to make others miserable. What had hardened her into this? Or had she always been this way? But another thought crept in, stronger than pity. If she wanted a fight, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. The next morning, I opened the blinds, and there she was again, clipboard in hand, like a general preparing for war. She marched across the lawn, uninvited, tapping her pen on the window as if I were her subordinate. "Your car is parked too close to the curb. Against HOA Code Section 14, she barked, waving her paper. I smiled, sipping my coffee slowly before answering. Good thing I'm not in the HOA then. Her face turned red, and for a brief moment I saw the mask slip. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about community standards. It was about control. And people like her, they couldn't stand when control slipped through their fingers. As the days passed, her harassment escalated. Letters in my mailbox, notes shoved under my door, neighbors whispering as she spread stories about me, half-truths twisted into gossip. She's refusing to pay dues. She thinks she's above the rules. She's going to ruin the neighborhood. I could feel the weight of their judgment, strangers glaring at me as I walked my dog, conversations stopping when I passed by. It was isolation by design, and Karen was the architect. Still, I stayed silent. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't, and every day she pushed harder, she was writing the script for her own downfall. One evening, I overheard her talking to another neighbor in that same sharp, brittle voice. "Don't worry, I'll take care of her. Nobody moves into my neighborhood and ignores the rules, not while I'm HOA president. Her neighborhood, her rules." That was the moment I realized she didn't just see herself as a neighbor, she saw herself as queen. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the ground beneath her throne was already cracking. Because behind the scenes, I wasn't just a new face moving into town. I was the one who held the deed to her house. I was the one who'd been quietly collecting her rent for months. And when the time was right, I was going to remind her of a truth no HOA president could ever erase. This neighborhood didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. Everyone told me to ignore her. "Don't take it personally," one neighbor whispered when Karen stormed away after another argument. But how could I not? Every day, it was something new. The garbage bins weren't pulled in quickly enough. My porch light was too bright. Even the way my dog barked was, in her words, a noise violation. She wasn't just nitpicking. She was circling me like a hawk looking for weakness. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found a letter on official-looking paper. Large, bold letters at the top. Notice of fine. $200. For what, according to her, failure to comply with community landscaping standards. I stared at the paper, half in disbelief, half in anger. This was fraud. She had no jurisdiction over me, no legal ground to stand on, and yet here she was trying to build a case. I could confront her right then. I could march to her front door and wave the deed in her face, the one that proved she was my tenant, not my ruler. But a voice inside me whispered, not yet. Wait. Because timing is everything, and sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the crickets outside, wondering how someone could spend so much of their life inventing ways to control others. Did she believe she was protecting the neighborhood, or did she simply crave the power of watching others bend to her will? At dawn, I made a choice. I wasn't going to be her victim. I was going to be her mirror. So the next time she marched over, waving another sheet of paper about violations, I greeted her with the warmest smile I could muster. Thank you, Karen, I said sweetly. I'll be sure to take that under advisement. She froze. She wasn't expecting compliance. She was expecting resistance, a fight, but my calmness disarmed her, and that scared her more than anger ever could. Because when you're playing chess, sometimes the quietest move is the deadliest. Still, her campaign against me grew. She gathered allies, neighbors who nodded politely when she complained, people too afraid to stand up to her. Together, they whispered about forming a committee to pressure me. And yet, none of them knew the truth. The queen they were bowing to was living in a castle she didn't even own. I remember the night the first cracks appeared in her armor. I was walking my dog past her house when I heard shouting from inside. Karen's voice, sharp and frantic, and another voice, her husband's, booming back at her. You're obsessed, he shouted. It's a house, Karen, just a house. There was silence, then a door slammed. For the first time I saw it, her power wasn't absolute. Her kingdom was fragile. But fragile kingdoms often fight the hardest to survive. The next morning she went further than ever before. She stood in the middle of the street, clipboard in hand, pointing to my house as neighbors gathered around. This resident is destroying the value of our community, she announced like a prosecutor. She refuses to join the HOA, refuses to comply with standards. If she won't pay, she doesn't belong here. The crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably. And me, I just stood there quiet, my dog at my side, watching her burn every ounce of credibility she had left. Because here's the thing about lies. They can spread fast, but they can't survive the light of truth. And truth was on my side. That night I sat at my desk and opened the folder I'd kept locked away since I bought the property. Inside was the deed, the lease agreement, every payment receipt signed by one person, Karen herself. Her signature, her handwriting, her obligation. She wasn't the queen of the neighborhood. She was my tenant, and sooner or later she would have to face that reality. But still, I waited, because exposing her wasn't just about proving I was right. It was about showing everyone else what happens when power is abused. Sometimes, life has a way of teaching lessons far better than revenge ever could. And as I watched Karen from my window that night, packing back and forth under the glow of her porch light, I realized something. She was terrified. Not of me, not of fines or violations, but of losing the one thing she clung to more tightly than anything else. Control. She had built her entire identity on rules, titles, and the illusion of authority. Without it, who was she? That question haunted her more than any letter, any confrontation, any punishment I could deliver. And the truth, the real truth, was that the walls of her kingdom were already crumbling. Because the landlord she'd tried to bully wasn't just another neighbor. I was the one who held the key to her front door. Everyone wondered why I stayed so quiet, why I didn't fight back, why I let Karen run her mouth unchecked. What they didn't realize was silence is a weapon, and mine was sharper than any of her rules. Still, even the strongest patience is tested. It was a Saturday morning when I woke to the sound of pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even reach the handle. When I opened it, there she was. Clipboard clutched in one hand, the other on her hip, eyes blazing like she had caught me committing a crime. "Your lawn," she snapped, pointing at the patch of grass near the sidewalk. "It's half an inch too long. This is your final warning." I almost laughed, half an inch, but I kept my composure, sipping my coffee, letting her rant. And then she said it, the sentence that told me just how far she was willing to go. "If you don't comply, I'll start the eviction process." Eviction? On a house I owned. The irony nearly knocked me off my feet, but I didn't say a word, not yet, because the power of a reveal lies in the waiting. Instead, I nodded, thanked her for her concern, and gently closed the door. Behind the glass, my hands trembled, not from fear, from restraint, because every instinct screamed at me to slam the truth in her face right then. But no, the timing wasn't right. See, Karen wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was digging her own grave, and I needed her to keep digging until there was no way out. That week she escalated further. I started finding flyers taped to my door. Ugly, bold letters shouting things like, "Community standards matter. Say no to freeloaders." Some neighbors looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, but still no one dared challenge her directly. Fear, that was her currency, and she spent it freely. But behind the fear was something else, something fragile. Because when people rule by intimidation, their power exists only as long as others believe in it. And cracks were forming. One evening, as I took out the trash, an older neighbor approached me. He looked around nervously, as if afraid Karen might pop out from the bushes. "Don't let her get to you," he whispered. "She's been like this for years, always looking for someone to control." I asked him why no one ever stopped her. He sighed, because most people don't want to be the target. Easier to stay quiet. Easier, safer. But silence, I realized, was also complicity. And Karen thrived on it. Still, the universe has a way of balancing scales. The next week I received a letter in the mail, not from Karen, from the city. It seemed someone had filed a complaint against me for property neglect. But the inspector's note was clear. No violations found. Which meant one thing. Karen had tried to weaponize the system against me, and failed. When the inspector left, I caught sight of her watching from across the street. She tried to look casual, but I saw the tightness in her jaw, the way her hands fidgeted with her clipboard. That was the first time I saw it, fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, fear of losing. And still I stayed quiet. Because patience wasn't weakness, it was strategy. But my patience almost cracked the night she came after my dog. I was walking him by the park when she appeared, camera phone raised like a weapon. "Your animal is off-leash," she barked, though he was clearly tethered to my hand. "That's another violation." I tried to walk past her, but she stepped in front of me, blocking the path. "You think you're above the rules, don't you? You think you can live here without paying, without respect? Well, not in my neighborhood." My chest tightened. My dog whimpered at my side, and for the first time I felt real anger boiling up. But even then, I didn't reveal the truth. Because the truth needed an audience. That night I sat at my desk staring at the deed, at her lease, at every receipt with her signature. And I knew the time was coming. Soon, Karen would stand in front of everyone she had manipulated, every neighbor she had silenced, and she would hear the words that would tear down the empire she had built from fear. Words I had held back for weeks. "You don't own me. You don't own this neighborhood. Because the house you live in belongs to me." Everyone thought she was untouchable. The self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Clipboard in hand, rules on her lips, power in her stride. But every empire has cracks, and Karen's were starting to show. It began with whispers, quiet conversations among neighbors, spoken just out of her earshot. A couple on the corner muttering about how they were tired of the endless notices. A young family rolling their eyes when she circled their yard, jotting notes like a detective on a crime scene. For years, people had nodded, paid their fines. Not because they believed in her, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. But fear doesn't last forever. One evening, I stood on my porch and watched as Karen marched toward my house again. Clipboard clutched tightly, jaw set like stone, but something was different. She wasn't striding with confidence. She was stomping, angry, agitated. And when she handed me the latest notice, this one claiming I owed back dues of nearly $1,000, her hand was trembling. "You have until Friday," she snapped, "or I'll take this to collections." Collections? She said it like a threat, like she had the power to take what was mine. But the thing about empty threats is, they echo louder the closer someone gets to losing. I held the paper for a long moment, then looked her straight in the eye. "Thank you, Karen, I'll take care of it." I closed the door slowly, savoring the confusion flickering across her face. Because she didn't know that I already was taking care of it, just not the way she expected. Inside, I opened my folder again, the lease, the deed, the receipts, every page a brick in the wall of truth I'd been quietly building. And soon, the wall was going to come crashing down. But until then, I needed patience. Because the louder she shouted, the clearer it became to everyone else what she really was, a bully in a crown made of paper. The breaking point came a few days later. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. She printed flyers, taped them to mailboxes, slipped them under doors. "Mandatory attendance," the bold letters declared. Mandatory, in a neighborhood where not every home was even under her rule. That Thursday night, the community center buzzed with voices. Neighbors gathered in folding chairs, tired faces lit by the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Karen stood at the front like a general preparing for battle. Clipboard in hand, she cleared her throat dramatically. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We have a serious issue threatening the integrity of our neighborhood. One resident refuses to comply with our standards. She refuses to pay dues. She refuses to respect the rules." Every eye turned to me. I felt the heat of their stares, the weight of their judgment. My dog rested at my feet, calm as ever, while Karen's words filled the room like smoke. "She is lowering our property values," Karen pressed on, her voice growing louder, sharper. "If we allow this kind of behavior, our entire community will fall apart." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and that was when I saw it. The desperation. This wasn't confidence. This was fear disguised as authority. A neighbor raised his hand timidly. "But she's not actually in the HOA, right? That house is exempt, isn't it?" The room shifted, murmurs, heads turning, people exchanging uncertain looks. Karen froze. For the briefest moment, her mask slipped. Then she laughed, high, brittle, forced. "Technicalities," she said quickly. "It doesn't matter. She lives here and she should follow the rules like everyone else." But the seed of doubt had been planted. And as the murmurs grew louder, I sat there silently, because I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was already doing the work for me. When the meeting ended, Karen stormed out, her heels striking the floor like hammers. I watched her go, her clipboard clutched so tightly I thought it might snap in half. And I realized something. She wasn't just fighting me anymore, she was fighting time. Because every day, every lie, every desperate attempt to control brought her closer to the moment when her illusion of power would shatter. That night, as I walked home, the air felt different, lighter. For the first time since moving in, I saw neighbors smile at me. A small nod from the couple on the corner. A quiet good evening from the man with the tired eyes. It was subtle, but it was change. Karen's kingdom was shrinking. And soon it would collapse completely. Everyone in the neighborhood was starting to feel it. The shift. The subtle unraveling of Karen's grip. But when a queen senses her crown slipping, she doesn't step down quietly. She digs her nails in. And Karen's nails were sharper than ever. It started with little things. retaliations designed to remind me that she still held sway. A neighbor confessed that Karen had warned them not to let their children play near my yard. Another whispered that she was telling people my mortgage was in default, that soon the bank would take the property back. Lies, fabrications, but poisonous ones. I could feel the tension every time I walked my dog. Eyes lingering a little too long, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Half the neighborhood didn't know what to believe anymore. And that was exactly how Karen wanted it. Because control thrives in confusion. But there's a problem with lies. The bigger they get, the heavier they become, and sooner or later they collapse under their own weight. That moment came one sunny afternoon. I was pulling weeds in the garden when I heard Karen's voice carry across the street. Loud, meant to be overheard. "She doesn't belong here," she was telling a small group of neighbors. "She's ruining the community. I've already filed the paperwork. She'll be gone in 30 days. 30 days? I froze, dirt still clinging to my gloves. She wasn't just bluffing anymore. She was telling people she had the power to evict me. And that was the moment I knew. It was time to stop holding back. But the reveal had to be perfect, public, unmistakable, the kind of truth you couldn't spin or twist. So I waited. A week later, my chance arrived. Another HOA meeting, this one even bigger than the last. Karen had stirred the pot to boiling, and the entire neighborhood showed up, hungry for answers. The room buzzed with tension as Karen strutted to the front. Clipboard in hand, voice booming with forced authority. "This resident," she declared, pointing directly at me, "is in violation of everything our community stands for. She refuses to pay. She refuses to respect our code, and now she faces eviction." Gasps, whispers, all eyes turned toward me. I stood slowly, heart pounding but face calm. "Eviction," I said softly. "That's a strong word, Karen. Do you have proof?" Her lips curled into a smile. "Oh, I have more than proof. I have the paperwork, and if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll see you in court." The room grew silent. Perfect. Because silence is where truth speaks the loudest. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. The sound of paper sliding across wood echoed like a drumbeat. "These," I said, opening the folder, "are the property records for my house. As you can see," I held up the deed, my name printed in bold black ink. "This home has never been part of the HOA. Not now, not ever." Murmurs swept through the room. Karen's smile faltered. "And these," I continued, lifting another set of documents, "are lease agreements, rent receipts, all signed by you, Karen." Her face drained of color. The room erupted. Shocked voices, gasps, even laughter. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide, reading the signatures for themselves. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She reached for her clipboard as if it were a shield, flipping through papers that suddenly seemed meaningless. For the first time, the Queen had no words. I looked her in the eye and spoke the truth she had been running from all along. "You're not my landlord, you're not my boss, you're not even in charge of me, because the house you live in belongs to me." The room fell into stunned silence. Then slowly a ripple of murmurs spread. Some neighbors smirked, others shook their heads in disbelief. And Karen, she looked like the floor had just given way beneath her. Because in that moment, her entire empire, built on rules, fear, and lies, collapsed with a single sentence. But I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice or revel in her humiliation. I simply closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked out. Because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like restraint. That night, as I sat on my porch, I thought about everything that had happened. About the way Karen had treated me, about the fear she'd instilled in others, about the lesson hidden in it all. Control built on intimidation isn't real. Power built on lies doesn't last. And sooner or later, the truth always comes knocking. For me, it came with papers and signatures. For Karen, it came with silence. And as the crickets sang in the warm night air, I realized something simple, something true. Sometimes, the sweetest victory is not in watching someone fall, but in knowing you never had to raise your hand to push. Everyone expected fireworks after that meeting. A shouting match, a dramatic scene, maybe even Karen storming into court, papers flying like confetti. But what came instead was quieter and far more devastating. The silence. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when the wreckage lies bare and everyone finally sees the truth. Neighbors avoided her. Whispers filled the air, this time not about me, but about her. The queen who had ruled with fines and threats had been dethroned in a single night. I would watch from my porch as she stepped outside, clipboard still in hand, but no one approached her anymore. No one listened. She looked around like a performer waiting for applause that would never come. It was strange, almost sad, to see someone so desperate for control left standing alone. Almost sad, because sympathy doesn't erase the harm she caused, and she had caused plenty. The first crack showed at the next HOA board meeting. She walked in, chin high, ready to bark orders. But instead of nodding heads and fearful eyes, she found folded arms and cold stares. "Karen," one board member said flatly, "we've reviewed your conduct, you've overstepped. And until further notice, you're suspended as HOA president." Suspended. The word hit her like a slap. She sputtered, tried to argue, waved her clipboard like a sword. But the more she spoke, the more the room turned against her. She had gone too far. And now, the very people she once intimidated were reclaiming their voices. She stormed out, eyes blazing, heels clattering against the tile. And for the first time, she didn't look like a ruler. She looked small. But the unraveling didn't stop there. Because while the HOA crumbled beneath her, something far more personal was about to hit. Her rent. Every month, like clockwork, she wrote a check, and every month I cashed it without a word. But now the balance of power had shifted. She knew I knew, and every signature she wrote was no longer routine, it was a reminder. A reminder that the home she clung to wasn't hers at all. I remember the first payment after the reveal. She left the envelope in my mailbox instead of handing it to me directly. Her name, scribbled at the bottom, looked shakier than usual, as if her hand had trembled. I held the paper for a long moment, not out of cruelty, but out of realization. This was the real Karen, stripped of titles, stripped of fear tactics, just another tenant paying rent to the very person she tried to destroy. And I wondered, what does someone like her see in the mirror at night? Does she see a fighter clinging to dignity? Or does she see the cracks, the truth she can't control? The neighborhood saw it. People who once whispered behind closed doors now waved to me openly. The couple on the corner stopped by with cookies. The old man who'd warned me about Karen invited me for coffee. Slowly, walls of fear gave way to bridges of trust. And all the while, Karen grew quieter. Not kinder, not gentler, just quieter. Her yard, once pristine, started to slip. Weeds sprouted, paint peeled. The woman who once fined people for crooked shutters now had shutters of her own hanging loose. Because control isn't just about others. It's about the illusion you keep for yourself. And when that illusion breaks, everything crumbles. One evening I saw her sitting alone on her porch. No clipboard, no phone, just her staring into the dark. And for a brief moment, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction, but pity. Because power had been her lifeline, and without it she was drowning. But pity doesn't mean forgetting. I still remembered the lies, the harassment, the humiliation she'd tried to paint me with. I remembered the way she spoke to me as if I were less than human, as if she owned me. And so I let her sit in that silence, not out of vengeance, but out of justice. Because sometimes the harshest punishment isn't what you take away. It's what you leave behind. Weeks passed, the neighborhood breathed easier. Children laughed in the park again. Neighbors hosted barbecues without fear of a clipboard looming in the background. And me, I finally felt at home. Not because the house was mine, not because I had proven Karen wrong, but because the people around me, the ones she'd kept silent, had found their voices again. That was the real victory. Karen, she faded into the background, no longer feared, no longer followed, just another neighbor stripped of her crown. And as the season changed and the first leaves fell, I realized something simple, something true. Control doesn't come from rules or titles. It comes from respect. And respect is something you can never force. Everyone thought the story was over. That once Karen lost her title, the curtain would fall and life would return to normal. But life rarely ties itself up so neatly. Because even after the crown was gone, the shadows of her rule lingered. I saw it in the little things, the way neighbors still flinched when a letter appeared in their mailbox, expecting another notice. The way conversations hushed when she walked by, though now no one cared to hear what she had to say. Fear leaves scars, and scars don't fade overnight. But scars can remind you of survival too. The neighborhood began to change in small but powerful ways. A potluck here, a yard sale there, laughter echoing from driveways that had once fallen silent under her gaze. It was like the community was breathing again. And yet there she was, Karen, moving through the streets like a ghost of the ruler she once pretended to be. No clipboard anymore, no board meetings, no allies at her side, just her walking quickly, eyes down, as though avoiding the very people she once commanded. It would have been easy to celebrate her fall, to feel triumphant every time I passed her and saw the tension in her jaw. But instead, I felt something heavier. Because behind the brittle mask, I saw a truth I hadn't expected. She wasn't just angry, she was broken. One afternoon, as I was trimming the hedges, I overheard her speaking on the phone. Her voice was low, shaky, not the booming command I'd grown used to. "They don't listen to me anymore," she whispered. "They don't even look at me. I don't know who I am without this." That sentence stuck with me. I don't know who I am without this. And suddenly, it all made sense. Her obsession, her cruelty, her desperate grip on control. It wasn't about the HOA. It wasn't about rules. It was about identity. Without the title, without the illusion of power, she was nothing. At least nothing she recognized. And in a way, that was the saddest part of all. But sadness doesn't erase damage. The lies she spread had hurt people. The fines she'd imposed had cost families money they never should paid. The fear she instilled had silenced voices for years. So pity or not, she had to live with the consequences. And those consequences were everywhere. Neighbors no longer invited her to gatherings. Kids who once waved nervously now darted past her without a glance. Even her own lawn, the one she used to showcase like a trophy, was slipping into disrepair. Because when respect disappears, isolation follows close behind. But the universe, I've learned, has a way of balancing things. A few weeks later, a "for sale" sign appeared in her yard. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, staring at the red letters. Part of me wasn't surprised. She couldn't bear to live in a place where the illusion of her reign had shattered. But part of me wondered if this was her chance, not to run, but to start over. Would she take it? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she walked across the street. For the first time in months, she approached me without a clipboard, without anger in her eyes. Just exhaustion. "I'll be out by the end of the month," she said quietly. "The house, it doesn't feel like mine anymore." I wanted to tell her it never had been, that it had always belonged to me, that the rent checks she signed were proof of that. But instead, I just nodded. Because sometimes silence is kinder than truth. She turned to go, then paused. "You won," she said, her voice almost breaking. "I don't know how, but you won." I watched her walk away, shoulders slumped, a figure swallowed by the twilight. And in that moment, I realized something important. Winning hadn't been about proving her wrong. It hadn't been about humiliating her in front of the neighborhood. It had been about outlasting her, about showing that dignity can withstand cruelty, that truth can survive lies, that patience can overcome force. That was the real victory. The neighborhood thrived in the months that followed. People took ownership not just of their homes, but of their community. Decisions were made together, not dictated from above. The fear was gone. And every time I walked my dog down those streets, I felt it. The lightness, the laughter, the freedom. Karen, she was gone. But her story lingered. Not as a warning about rules or HOAs or even bullies, but as a reminder of something deeper. That power without respect is hollow. And that sometimes, the strongest move you can make isn't to fight harder. It's to wait. Because time has a way of revealing truth. And truth always wins. Everyone thought it ended when she left. The for sale sign taken down, the moving truck loaded, the porch light across the street finally dark. But stories don't end with boxes and goodbyes. They end with what's left behind. And Karen left behind more than silence. She left behind lessons. The neighborhood changed after she was gone. People lingered on sidewalks to chat. Parents waved as kids played freely in yards that once had been measured with rulers. The air felt lighter, as if the whole community had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. I watched it unfold from my porch, coffee warm in my hands, dog curled at my feet. Peace. Simple, quiet peace. Something I'd almost forgotten was possible. But late at night, when the crickets sang and the street lay still, I'd catch myself thinking about her. About the woman who had ruled through fear, who'd tried to chain me with rules that never applied. I wondered if she sat somewhere new, clipboard in hand, trying again, or if the silence finally caught up to her. And sometimes, I almost wished I'd asked her why. Why she needed power so badly. Why she fought so hard to control others instead of her own life. But maybe I already knew the answer. Because control at its root is fear. Fear of being invisible, fear of not mattering, fear of a world that doesn't bend when you push it. And Karen, beneath the rules and the fines and the fury, was just afraid. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. Because the neighbors she silenced, the families she fined, the whispers she spread, those scars lingered. And no matter how much pity I felt in quiet moments, the truth remained. She chose to hurt people. And choices have consequences. The greatest consequence of all is loneliness. When she left, no one stood on the curb to wave goodbye. No one brought casseroles or hugs or cards. Her departure was met not with tears, but with relief. And that, I think, was the punishment she never saw coming. Because power without love is just noise, and when the noise stops, you're left with nothing. One evening, months later, I walked the block with my dog. The sky was painted gold, laughter spilled from a barbecue down the street, music drifted from an open garage. A neighbor waved me over, handed me a plate of food, introduced me to friends I hadn't yet met. For the first time since moving in, I didn't feel like the new neighbor. I felt like part of something. And that's when it hit me. Karen had been wrong from the very beginning. Belonging doesn't come from rules. It doesn't come from fees or fines or codes. It comes from kindness, from respect, from the quiet strength of people choosing each other, not fearing each other. That's what makes a neighborhood. Not a president with a clipboard. Not an HOA with bylaws. But people standing side by side saying, "We're in this together." I looked back at the house across the street, the one she'd once ruled from like a fortress. A new family lived there now. Kids, toys scattered across the lawn, a swing hanging from the porch, laughter echoing from the windows. Life had moved on. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. No matter how much control someone tries to exert, no matter how many rules they invent, no matter how much fear they spread, life always moves on. Because dignity lasts longer than fear. Truth lasts longer than lies. And respect lasts longer than control. I thought about the moment at the meeting when I revealed the truth, the shock in her eyes, the silence that followed, the way the room shifted, not because I shouted, but because I waited. And I realized that moment wasn't about winning. It was about remembering something we often forget. That strength isn't in volume. It isn't in titles. It isn't in how many people you can bend to your will. It's in patience. It's in knowing who you are even when others try to define you. It's in standing quietly until the truth has no choice but to speak. So when people ask me what it was like living across from Karen, I don't tell them about the fines or the notes or the meetings. I tell them about the silence afterward, about the laughter that returned, the barbecues, the neighbors who found their voices again. Because that's the real ending. Not her downfall, but our beginnings. And as the sun sank low that evening, painting the street in warm light, I whispered a truth to myself that I carry to this day. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's building a life they can't touch.